Hello, Hidden Gems. Thank you for being with us for another Sunday night. People have been asking, are we switching our evening live to Sundays? No, we are not. We're always going to come live with you on a weekend night. We strive for Saturdays, but thanks for being flexible. We just want to make sure we never miss a night. And this weekend, we had guests. It went well. It was fun. Family in town, and they are now gone. But it's so good to see everyone tonight. It's so good that so many people are already here. Hey, everyone. Good to see you. We are covering a very important case tonight, something that Hidden True Crime has been covering from the very beginning. And by very beginning, I mean the first day this happened, October 7th, 2022. And there are recent updates, very big updates that we want to bring you. It's a case out of Excelsior Springs, Missouri. It's a suburb of Kansas City. So we are going to start. If you do not know what this case is about, it's about Timothy Haslett. You are in the right place. Don't fear. If you need an update on this case, a refresher, you are in the right place. We're going to start with a background on this case. We're going to tell you some then really interesting, important updates to this case. We're going to have insider details that nobody has heard, that you have not read in the news or heard from anybody else. We have been investigating for months behind the scenes. And then we are going to be able to pick Dr. John's incredible brain. And he has some things to say. We've been talking, and you can ask some questions. So that's how this night is going to go. We're going to jump to it, and we're going to play an introduction to this case. We're going to start with the first person I interviewed, the homeowner who let this woman in. It was her grandmother that let a woman in that escaped a house. So we're going to start with her telling me what happened and go from there. Here we are. And if you could mute, John, yourself.
Oh, yeah. Let's see here.
Metal collar.
Okay. And then what happened?
And she had,
once you're
she had duct tape around her neck too, which we're guessing her mouth was probably duct taped, and we think she probably grabbed it and pulled it down when she escaped.
Okay. And then what did your grandmother do after that? Was she brought her inside, took care of her, then what?
Around her neck, she could see ligature marks. And she was telling my grandma, I've been raped. I've been held captive. Please help me. You have to help me. He's going to end up killing me.
When you
and
say
so my grandma, she took a minute being home with a baby. It took her a minute, but then she just knew she needed to help her. And so she brought her in and sat her down and covered her up.
Yeah. What kind of barrels are they referring to being taken out? Are these barrels that the police brought in for evidence, or barrels that were in his house that they're taking out?
Everybody's guessing that they're barrels that they were taking out. They're big blue drums.
Wow. What else are you hearing from neighbors?
Well, not a whole lot. Like, the only neighbor I've really talked to is the one that had called 911. They said that a tow truck driver came to tow his truck away. And the tow truck driver made the comment, he's been towing vehicles from that residence, like different vehicles, the last couple months.
Wow.
Something horrible happened in Excelsior Springs, and that horrible let itself out into the neighborhood. Accusations that a man was holding at least one woman in a torture chamber in his basement, and when she got free, she ran to the neighbors. I said that neighbor is Lisa Johnson, and she was joining us for her very first television interview. We're having a problem with her connection right now. We're still working on it. And also with me is Lauren Matthias, who is the host of the Hidden True Crime podcast, who has been working on this story as well. So while we're working on Lisa's connection, Lauren, tell me a little bit about the condition that this woman was in when she showed up at that neighbor's door.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Lisa was so wonderful. The woman ran to Lisa, and Lisa called 911, and then the woman actually went to Sierra Tharp's home. I interviewed Sierra Tharp, and Sierra Tharp told me that the woman came to her door. She had duct tape around her neck. She was wearing a dog collar with a padlock on her neck that she couldn't get off. The police actually had to get that off. That she was emaciated, she was starving, she was wearing latex and a trash bag, was hardly wearing anything. That Sierra's grandmother gave her a blanket as well as muffins that she just devoured while they waited for police to arrive to help.
I know that some of the details say that Lisa, did a quick scan and thought she looked to be about 70 pounds and that she also looked as though she was dehydrated and she could barely whisper. She said it was extremely soft when she said, "Help me." But just clear up for me, Lisa Johnson is the first neighbor who encounters this woman on her doorstep. And as I understand it, she said, "I'm going to call 911 right away." And that terrified this woman who said, "He'll kill us. He'll kill us all if you do that." And then she ran to another neighbor?
That is what Lisa has said, but according to Sierra Tharp, when she arrived at her door, she said, help me, call 911, which they then did. He's going to kill me, he's going to kill me. And then she actually also said, my other friends didn't make it. They were murdered. And this is according to Sierra Tharp in an interview with me the day after they rescued her. They took her in. And the reason she was whispering, Lisa is absolutely right, because she had ligature marks on her neck, and police could not get the collar off until they unlocked it, and it was restricting her breathing. It was that taut. It was that tight. Yeah. And she had apparent physical injuries all over her back, where the probable cause actually states that she was whipped while in this torture chamber, homemade torture chamber.
And I think that's one of the descriptions that the latex that she was wearing had cuts in it, and that the witness described saying she had no idea how you could make those cuts. They didn't come from being hit. They were lashes, open wounds on her arm. Is it assumed that the lashes were from the whippings, or were there other injuries as well from other forms of torture?
According to the probable cause, she said that she had been whipped several times and they could see the marks all over her body. And then they did state in the probable cause she was indeed whipped. She had explained that she had been raped multiple times, beaten, and she was clearly starved, according to Lisa's account, that she was perhaps 70 pounds. This is a 22-year-old woman. So that's shocking to hear that Lisa thought that she looked about 70 pounds and that she did devour. I mean, think about that too, devouring muffins while having your, restricted breathing. She was that hungry, and that she had been, my word is torture. That's not from the probable cause, but I'll say it. It seemed to be that she had been tortured for about a month, because she said that she had been taken at the beginning of September.
Oh, so she also mentioned that two of her friends had been killed by this man. Timothy Haslett is her accusation. So curious about the police activity at the home and what they've found, because they have not said, to my knowledge, that they've discovered human remains of these two other young women.
Right. They have not said that they have found evidence of other victims, but they haven't said that they have not found evidence of other victims. And what's fascinating is that 2 weeks before this woman escaped her captor, Timothy Haslett Jr., Bishop Tony Caldwell from the Kansas City metro area went on TikTok and said, there is a serial killer targeting Black women in our neighborhood. The Kansas City Defender shared that information, and other local papers, as well as the Kansas City police, shot that down so quickly. They said, this is absolutely unfounded. 2 weeks later, this woman, she was a Black woman, she escaped
this house, this basement dungeon that he had made for the probable cause, says he made this basement bedroom basement bedroom where she was kept. And she stated to Sierra Tharp, my other friends didn't make it. And then police, as well as the FBI and other agencies, were at this property with cadaver dogs and multiple people for 3 days. They concluded their investigation by putting that chain link fence around the house that you see there. That's put up by the city. That wasn't there before, as well as boarded up his entire residence. They have not stated. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask you, Lauren, about, I think I read that there might have been some blue barrels that were at this residence that are no longer at this residence. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, there were probably about a dozen blue barrels that you could see them taking out of the yard and out of the house. And I'll say, I don't know if there were any in the house, but during the search, you could see several outside of the house. And there's actually video of a cadaver dog hitting on one of those blue barrels. They haven't shared what is in those blue barrels. We don't know, but it's very peculiar. And Home Depot employees in Excelsior Springs did state that he came in often. Timothy Haslett came in often. He was not employed at this time. He hadn't been working for about 3 years, but he was a frequent visitor at Home Depot. He had these blue barrels, and then he also worked on cars, and neighbors reported many tow truck visits to the house as well. And then they also mentioned
they reported that he was a recluse who never opened his garage all the way. I have to leave it there, Lauren, but let's continue to follow this to see what comes out of it. Such a disturbing story, and I'm so sorry that we couldn't get Lisa Johnson's connection up. We tried all the way through for the last 20 minutes, and it's just the bugaboos of live TV. But thank you, Lauren. Really appreciate you helping us through this.
All right. A couple things to update you. That was October 2022. That's when this case broke. And police have been very tight-lipped about it. Again, FBI, Kansas City Police, Excelsior Springs Police, multiple people. We do know now. I said that it looked like she was 70 pounds. We have now learned that she was indeed 70 pounds. Somebody else asked. She escaped. She says that she had been held from the beginning of September, and this was October 7th when she escaped. We have also learned that that whip that was in the basement and that she had whip marks and said she had been whipped. We learned that in his basement there was a bull whip, a whip for a bull. After this conversation, I interviewed Bishop Tony Caldwell from the Kansas City, Missouri metro area. He is the one who stated on TikTok that there was a serial killer targeting Black women in the Kansas City metro area. And people disregarded it. A paper disregarded it. Kansas City police seemingly disregarded it. I interviewed him, and I'm going to play a bit of that right now. John, take notes, because I have questions after I share all of these things. Go ahead with mute one more time, babe.
Okay.
It's almost like, here it is again. We don't exist. We don't exist. And I guarantee you this young lady, all the stuff that she had to endure, within the next 30 days, they won't even be talking about her anymore. That hurts my heart. And it'll be back to business as usual. It'll be back to who cares. It'll be back to, well, whatever happens on Prospect, that's just it. Whatever happens on Independence Avenue, who cares? But these are lies. I don't care what they've done.
Bishop, I want to say that the one outlet that did listen to you, that reposted your video, was the Kansas City Defender. The Kansas City Defender editor and I have talked. They are continuing to report on this. They are listening to you, as is Hidden True Crime. And I want to recommend people head to the Kansas City Defender. to see their latest. They've discovered that Timothy Haslett believed that there was a race war, that they have found old social media posts of his that are quite racist.
And if you look at how he treated her, he put a collar, a steel metal collar with a padlock around her neck. Every time I think about that, it takes me back to thinking about slavery, how slaves were treated in that same exact fashion, sold from one to the other, and not even treated as human beings. He didn't treat her like a human. He didn't treat those other ladies like a human.
So, I am going to have questions later on, John, about this being a possible targeted thing. We'll keep going, though. I just want to keep catching everybody up. We also, during the same interview with Bishop Tony Caldwell, he discussed why he felt that Black women had been being targeted and why he brought it up 2 weeks before this woman escaped Timothy Haslett's homemade dungeon, and what he was hearing on his end. And I'm going to play a little bit of that.
The information that is coming in to us from different people in the streets, it goes back at least 6-7 months, at least. From those that are in the streets that are reporting missing young ladies still, the same description of the guy up and down the neighborhood, up and down Prospect. They had a description of him, and that's who we were looking for.
Really?
At that time point. And we thought he was local.
They had a description of Tim Haslett?
Yes. The community had a description of him, scruffy, white guy, beard, hair all over his head. That was the description that we had back then. And, that sticks out in this neighborhood. It sticks out. Especially if you stay too long. You're cruising up and down Prospect over and over again. People are going to see that. And
right.
He wasn't buying drugs.
Wow.
So
they knew the description of Timothy Haslett was pointed out by those in your community.
Yes. She said her friends did not make it out. She didn't say her friend won. She said her friends did not make it out. As we're looking for one, we're starting to hear about other people missing, other young ladies missing in the same area about the same time.
I want to clarify that the victim, who is known in the probable cause as TJ, that escaped Timothy Haslett's home, was not labeled a missing person ever. The next woman we're going to talk about is also never been labeled a missing woman. And so this was October. And now we're going to fast forward to February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day, babe. February 14th, 2023. And police held a press conference where they actually, what this press conference was that a grand jury had indicted Timothy Haslett. He was charged with 9 counts, kidnapping, rape, sodomy, and then the last 9th count was endangering a child. He had a young son, a very young son, living at the house with him. And so we can assume that it was endangering his son. So I'm going to play you a bit of that February 14th press conference. Another important thing that they brought up at that press conference, which they sort of downplayed, was that there had been a witness, a potential witness that they were looking for, named Janie Crosdale. That Janie Crosdale was a possible witness to this crime. And while this press conference was to share the charges in the grand jury indictment, they brought up Janie Crosdale once again. I'm going to play this and then share some thoughts that I shared that same day on February 14th, 2023 about Janie, my thoughts on Janie.
I will also be providing a copy of a release from the Excelsior Springs Police Department that contains instructions about how someone with information about the whereabouts of potential witness Janie Crosdale can contact law enforcement. This is an open case. This is an ongoing investigation.
You believe Ms. Crosdale is a victim as well?
So we believe, based on the way the investigation is going so far, that she may have information relevant to the case. And that's all I can say about that.
Janie Crosdale, her face is on numerous billboards. It's been there now for months. Police, they stated in this press conference, they are still looking for her. So while they do not call her missing or endangered, I'm going to throw out some speculation. This is speculation. While I have some insider information, I do not have insider information on who Janie is and how she relates to this case. So this is speculation from Lauren, considering the information. There were numerous searches, days of searches at this house and in this property. We know now, this is some information we have, that there were 3 blue plastic barrels inside the residence, and there were 3 blue plastic barrels, I believe, outside the residence. There's video circulating of dogs hitting on those barrels. I want to know if they found this woman's DNA. This is speculation, because that would make her a possible witness to a crime. That would also, though, imply that she is a victim. I want to know who this woman is, and I want to know where she is. I'm very concerned that she's not come forward to police and nobody's been able to find her. It's not that she's just running from police. Let me say that we've looked into her social media accounts, and she is not active on any of her accounts. So there's the idea that she could be running from police. But at the same time, I want to throw that out, that I don't know if anybody's heard from her. We need to learn more about this woman. I don't know why they're looking for her or what information they have. Perhaps it's from the victim who escaped. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they didn't. Speculation. I'll throw that out one more time. But I think that clearly she is a big piece to this puzzle, and I hope that we find this woman, and I hope that she's okay. I'm concerned she's not. We will take you today. Now, not today, but in the past few weeks. In fact, I got the news of this when I was in Rexburg, Idaho. This is when this happened. That news came down that they found a blue barrel. 2 kayakers, actually, found a blue barrel floating down the Missouri River. And inside were the remains of Janie Crosdale. They found the remains, it turns out, on June 25th. So I don't know why the public wasn't aware of it until later in July. Maybe they were doing DNA testing. I'm not sure. But it is Janie Crosdale who was found. She was never labeled missing, and she was never labeled as someone like a victim that they were looking for. I also want to read to you a quote from an Excelsior Springs police chief. So as authorities, it states, are continuing, this is the Kansas City Star, as authorities continue to search the Missouri River for clues about what happened to a Kansas City woman, Janie Crosdale, whose remains were discovered in June. The Excelsior Springs police chief says the alleged kidnapper and rapist Timothy M. Haslett Jr. is a potential suspect in her death. He states this is one of those cases that keeps you up at night. Excelsior Springs police chief Gregory Dole told the Star during a phone interview Tuesday. My personal opinion is he's done more than what he's already charged for, he said of Haslett. But being able to prove that is a totally different thing. A Clay County grand jury has indicted Haslett on these charges of kidnapping, rape, and 7 other felonies. I mentioned that in February. But as of right now, they have not added any other charges. He is not charged with killing Janie, but he is a suspect in her death. There have been no additional charges, nor has his bond even been raised from the $3 million it is at right now. So his bond is at $3 million. I do believe that they requested his bond be raised while the investigation continues. The judge didn't see a reason, but he does remain behind bars at this time. So that is, I believe that you're all up to date now. John and I have been talking a lot. And we've been talking to many, many people. For those that have been following this, and for those that aren't, I recommend our full Timothy Haslett playlist. If our mods could post that, I'll share it here. But our entire Timothy Haslett playlist is a great place to start. But as you can see, we've interviewed many, many people, and we have continued to talk to many, many people, and we know a lot more about who Timothy Haslett is. These are all potential crimes. I wonder that we are possibly looking at a serial killer. We know that he built the room in his house of 2020, right? So we have years, right, John? I mean, we have years of having this home in his basement garage that he built, this homemade torture chamber.
Right.
Right. So
the room was built in early 2020, and then the first the first known victim escapes in October of 2022. So you're talking about well over 2 years with a room that seems to be specifically constructed for the purpose of harming victims, or at least torturing or holding victims captive. So I think you'd have to presume that, or I would presume that a room like this, built for a specific purpose, probably housed more than 2 victims. But again, we don't know for sure. And as you point out, Janie has not been charged with
Correct.
her murder at this point. Although,
so he's been charged with no murder right now because the woman escaped. He's been charged with kidnapping and the R word I'm not supposed to say on YouTube. So he's not been charged with murder. Right.
So at this point, obviously he hasn't been tried either. So at this point, everything is alleged and speculative, but certainly having a large number of blue barrels at your house with a victim who runs screaming out of your basement saying that, with a collar around her neck, saying that I escaped, he killed my friends. That doesn't look good, but yes, it has to be proven in a court of law.
Yes. I have questions. So, we've learned a lot about him. So again, to give people the timeline, we know that the room was built in 2020. Janie Crosdale's sister allegedly told a paper that she had last heard from Janie in August of 2022. And we know that TJ, the woman that escaped, states that she had been held since the beginning of September. And that she stated that he had killed her friends. So I do wonder if that was one of them. We don't know, speculation, but I'm just trying to give a timeline. And so, of course, again, there's a huge gap of time between when he built the room and Janie and TJ escaping. So, John, where do you want to start as far as talking? Do you want to talk a little bit about Tim right now, what we've learned about Tim, or where do you want to go from here?
I think you and I were talking earlier about some comparisons with Lisk or the Long Island serial killer. I think so. I think that's an interesting place to begin for a lot of reasons.
And that's why you've mentioned this is important too. Like, we feel this is really important right now when it comes to Lisk. We're seeing all these parallels with Rex Heuermann, where they are possibly targeting sex workers or just women or victims that are in very vulnerable positions. Go ahead, babe. Yeah. So that's been a lot of our conversation.
You just mentioned a really obvious parallel, which is the I don't know what to call it, the quiet room, the torture chamber room, the whatever, the Lisk apparently had a similar room too. I mean, we don't, with Timothy Haslett, it seems more clear cut that there was this room that was built specifically for that purpose. But with Rex Heuermann, he had some kind of room that had 3-foot concrete walls to reinforce it. So clearly he didn't want anyone to hear what was going on in there. It seems like, maybe this is a cliche for anyone who watches, Netflix films about murderers. They always have these types of rooms, right? But certainly they both seem to have a room like this. They both targeted very vulnerable, available women that I think that at probably some level they believed were a low priority for law enforcement, and that law enforcement wouldn't really go out of their way to find. So one of the terms I've heard for vulnerable women or sex workers that go missing is they're sometimes referred to as the missing. That, right, like that it's one thing to go missing, but the missing are generally the victims that are given low priority or little attention. And I think that in this particular case, I think there's a lot of reasons Timothy Haslett focused on this group specifically, but certainly one of the reasons was that he probably believed, like Rex Heuermann, that they wouldn't be given a high priority, as Bishop Caldwell pointed out. So I think that he knew that, and that was probably part of his decision to focus on that group, or one of the reasons he focused on that group.
Thank you, Cece, for the question. Yeah, and thank you for answering it, John, that they know to choose and target.
Yeah, I mean, and to get a little deeper into that issue, with Cece asking that question, there's a lot of reasons that group is targeted, not just being vulnerable to, that they're sort of a low priority for law enforcement in the community. I mean, maybe law enforcement would disagree with me, but historically that's been somewhat true. The population of women that are, sex workers tend to be somewhat transient. Many of them have substance abuse problems, so they sort of move in and out of communities or society. Their DNA tends to be hard to, the DNA of these types of victims tends to be hard to identify, because if they're with multiple people in a night or over a period of days, then how do you separate out, how do you find DNA that might identify the victim? I think with Haslett, perhaps that's different because he held these people captive, he held these women captive. The bodies in these particular cases tend to be moved to other locations. Oftentimes they're moved to other jurisdictions. And because of that, you have confusion over who has priority, who's in charge of that jurisdiction. So when these bodies are moved, when the bodies of this particular population are moved, a lot of times they're decomposed. They're hard to find. A lot of times they'll sit in really remote locations for many years. So, there's so many reasons why this particular group is vulnerable, and why in many cases, serial killers might want to target that group. I think it gives them a better chance potentially to get away with murder. So, even like with Huerman was seemingly putting his victims in a fairly similar area, but it seems as if the crimes were occurring at his house. So, but by moving the body to a different location, you're disrupting the crime scene. You're changing the dynamics of the crime scene, and you're making it much more difficult to figure out what's going on, especially if the crime scene is altered or cleaned or changed in any way. And obviously, when you take a body from a crime scene, you're really transforming law enforcement's ability to solve the crime. So, and in these types of cases, the bodies are almost always moved, or they're disfigured, or I don't know. It's interesting in the case of Tim Haslett, these barrels were plastic, and you and I have learned and have some indication that he had acid, a specific type of acid at his home, which for anybody who's watched Breaking Bad or just followed true crime for that matter, plastic barrels with a specific type of acid usually means that bodies are being dissolved. And so if you want to completely eliminate evidence and a body for that matter, it's conceivable that you would get these types of barrels to do that.
Yes. Yes. Kathleen, thank you. She states this is so horrific, using dog collars and torture. This is more than just killing.
Yeah.
This guy is a sadist, I think.
Yeah. Well, Bishop Caldwell had a really good point, which is that he said that I don't know if he used this term, but there's certainly a huge element of dehumanization here. To treat victims and forget about the color of their skin, but to treat any victim in this manner is so dehumanizing and so horrific. I noticed that there was a little discussion about race in the chat, and we might get into that a little later. But I think it's obviously very relevant in this case because that's who he's targeting. So, and it's relevant because Tim Haslett has a number of posts on social media where he says really racist things, and he makes it clear that he's racist. So
he states it himself. Yeah, he makes it clear on social media. Yes.
So if you're targeting Black women and you're making racist comments and you're showing that you're a racist who hates Black women, race is relevant.
Right. And we've talked to several people who knew Timothy Haslett, and one thing that they repeat to me and to us is that they state he did not like, that he was a racist. He did not like Black people, and he did not like women. He was a misogynist and a racist. And that has now come from multiple sources. So.
Right. So I think if you want to look at a case like this objectively, you have to consider that to be an important element. Otherwise, you're whitewashing it, so to speak. You're ignoring certain facts that are critical to these crimes. Whether that's pleasant to someone or not, that's not up to me to determine. But my job is to just try to look at the evidence and the facts and make an objective analysis of someone's psychological state. So
we've learned a lot about Timothy Haslett, including his past. And again, for those that want to hear some of the interviews we've had with people that knew him, you can head to our playlist. It will be in this description of this video after we conclude as well. I'll put it there and in a pinned comment. But we've also talked to many, many people behind the scenes as well. We've learned a lot about his upbringing, his childhood, a mother who died of drug addiction and a stepmother. What do you want to share right now that you think is important, John? I know you don't want to share everything.
Yeah. So let's just, since since I'm talking about Huerman a little bit, let's jump in with some more comparisons. So one of the things we know about Timothy Haslett is, like Huerman, there was some bullying going on. It seems like with Timothy Haslett, the bullying was in middle school, high school, kind of like Huerman. It seemed to be mostly verbal, that he was verbal and emotional, bullying. He was ostracized quite a bit. He was a loner in high school. He did apparently have a girlfriend for several years in high school, but other than that, he was widely considered to be a bit of a misfit and an outcast. And so, again, very similar to Huerman. We know that Timothy Haslett, and I think this is probably the most relevant, is that his mother was a drug addict. She later died of a drug overdose, but so his biological mother, had him until the age of 12. And the other thing about living with his mother was, apparently she had a history of abusive relationships, and he would witness those. So whether or not Timothy Haslett was actually caught in the middle of the crossfire in those relationships or physically abused by some of her mother's boyfriends, we don't know. He's been really, apparently, he's very, very reluctant, apparently, to discuss his relationship with his biological mother. He doesn't speak poorly of her, but we do know that there was a lot of domestic violence when Timothy Haslett was growing up. We do know that his mother was an addict. And it's interesting that in domestic violence types of relationships in childhoods, many times children are deeply affected, but some children react quite differently to those types of environments. And I think we've also learned that Tim Haslett apparently saw his father as a bit of a wimp. And so that's relevant in the sense that I don't know if his father was abusive to the mother. It doesn't sound like it. It sounds like it was other boyfriends, but it's relevant in the sense that sometimes in these types of abusive childhoods, the men or the males or the boys will vow to, a couple things happen. They oftentimes blame the women for being weak. They blame their mothers for being weak and not standing up to the abusers. But then over time, there's a shift, and they start identifying with the aggressors, or they start identifying more with the abusers. And I think Tim Haslett, by seeing his father as being somewhat wimpy, or I forget the term that we heard, but that he's angry at his father because he wished that he had a strong male figure in his life, and he doesn't, and he didn't. And at some point, there's this shift from being angry at his mother for being abused, I think, to identification with the aggressor, where he blames his mother for being weak, and he wants to be seen as strong, right? So he starts to occupy that more masculine, kind of macho male role over time, and he starts really disliking or developing a great deal of anger towards women that begins with his mother. So I think my guess is that these domestic violence relationships that Tim Haslett experienced repeatedly probably play a really important role in these later crimes.
As Terry Hammond states, it seems to always be the case with people like him: bullying, hard home life, mommy or daddy issues. These are all factors that make people into the people they are. And we've discussed this a lot with Rex Huerman too, Lisk, or the Long Island serial killer. Right. There are a lot of similar things we've heard. And this is coming from other people, guys. We're hearing this from his history. People are sharing this with us. And so I just keep turning to John saying, this sounds so similar to what you've been saying about Rex Heuermann. It's just been so odd for me to actually hear it from people saying he was bullied and this happened, a
Well,
broken home life.
with
They both
with
lost
Rex
parents.
Heuermann, with Rex Heuermann, I think it was more about his dad seems to be the one who was aggressive, and his dad was overly critical of him. And so I think he sort of internalized this emasculated sense of self that he wasn't ever good enough. I think with Timothy Haslett, he probably had a lot of anger toward his mother for maybe not protecting him, but also for taking the abuse, for being in these relationships repeatedly. And so initially, a lot of children will feel some compassion for their mothers or try to protect them when they're younger. But then over time, they often see their mothers as being weak for taking the abuse and for getting in these relationships repeatedly. So a lot of times you'll see a shift where they begin to identify more with the aggressive males and they begin to really dislike women. And I think he probably has anger towards his dad. He sees his dad as being, not a strong male. And so perhaps he, even though his father wasn't with his mother during those early years, he might blame his father for leaving his mother or for not being the strong male that he needed, or maybe he was never the strong male he needed. I think there's probably a lot of components to that story.
Two questions that I think about when it comes to Rex. They both lost a parent at a young age, each a different parent. Timothy Haslett lost his mother. Rex lost his father. Does that play a part in this?
Yeah, for sure. I think grief at a young age, and they both lost parents around the same age, 11, 12-ish. Unresolved grief can lead a tremendous wound, and it's very difficult sometimes for, especially children like Timothy Haslett that have experienced all this violence around them. It's difficult for them to really kind of repair that wound and to make sense of the world at such a young age when the person that's supposed to nurture and protect them all of a sudden is gone.
I have heard, both of them, I have heard that Timothy Haslett actually would not say anything negative about his birth mother.
Yeah.
Despite her, I'm sure she wasn't perfect. She was an addict. She struggled herself. And Rex Heuermann, it's been told, took care of his mother, or sort of like the man in the house, and bought his childhood home even from her.
I don't know if he took.
Oh, go ahead.
I don't know if he took care of her. I think my understanding is she was very controlling and overbearing. So I think she was demanding and sort of forced him to come home right after school. And so I think I don't know, I think he buys the childhood home probably for a lot of reasons, but some of it probably has to do with his father, that he had a lot of memories of his father, and his father had a lot of stuff, a lot of memorabilia in the home, and he wanted to keep it there, I think. So I think they're a little different, but certainly that loss at an early age can create a lot of trauma for children. And, with Timothy Haslett, you're adding trauma upon trauma. You got violent relationships. The mother's involved in a series of violent relationships during his childhood, and then he loses her. So you're just stacking trauma upon trauma.
Both Rex and Timothy had been divorced. They were at different places in their life when arrested. So Timothy was in his 30s when he was arrested, but had been divorced from his son's mother. A lot of people are asking about his son. I want to say that I have heard the son is safe with his mother. So the child is in good hands, and she's a good person. Is taking care of him. But he was divorced from her. Rex had also been divorced. He remarried and then was still married when he was arrested. But I've also wondered about that divorce from women in their lives, and if that added to any anger or what that might do to have a divorce like that.
Yeah, it's a failure. I think one thing we know about Timothy Haslett is that he felt like he could never connect to women, that he could never sustain a relationship or a significant relationship. And I'm sure that was a part of his anger, that he really, like Rex Huerman, he really seemed to struggle with social skills and social competence. And, and consequently, both of them were, for the most part, loners. I mean, yes, they were married. Well, Timothy Haslett was married but divorced. They were, Rex Huerman was married at the end, but I'm not sure he was close to his wife. It seems to me like there wasn't a lot of happiness in that home. I think that it seems like the family that was together in that home was very disconnected. So even though he was married, he still seems very much like a loner, and he's clearly leading a double life. So the commonality is that they both are very much misfits to some degree. They're both loners. I think Rex Huerman has more education and he's more of a professional in his work. Tim Haslett's more of a blue collar guy. So there's a little bit of difference there. I think that Huerman is probably a better planner, and Haslett is much more impulsive, it seems to me. Probably he's probably not planning well, and he's probably making decisions on the spur of the moment. But so there are differences too. Clearly, age. Huerman's older. Huerman's was able to pull off these crimes for a longer period of time, it seems.
Yeah, or not get arrested as soon. Although, at the same time, again, we haven't seen any more, charges for Tim either. So
Right.
But they both seem to be living a different life. I'm sure that the son's mother would have never let her son over there if she had known what Tim was really up to, and his ex-wife. And I don't believe that Rex Huerman's wife knew what was going on, in my opinion. People are actually asking John about drugs and Tim, and then Janine. So someone said, do you think there were drugs involved, prescription or otherwise? And then Janine said, wasn't the ex reported to be an addict? This is actually really interesting information. It was not reported that the ex-wife was an addict from anyone but Tim himself. Tim wrote a letter from the court, and John and I have been discussing this letter too, where he actually mentioned his wife is a drug addict, but he was just really, really upset that she, after his arrest and charges, after TJ escaped, she put in a restraining order and made sure that, he could not see their son. And that really angered him. And he threw out a lot of things about her, including that she was a drug addict. But I want to say this is really interesting. It was originally reported that when TJ escaped, TJ did tell police that Timothy had told her that he was taking his son to school and that he would be right back. And the school is about 2 minutes away. So that makes sense. It was early in the morning. But what actually happened, and we've confirmed this, this is insider information that we have, that's not where he was going. His dog had gotten out, and that's why he came back home. But when he was charged, and then police happened to be there, and they arrested him for a dog out of the yard while they processed what to do about, to get charges for TJ. But what we learned is that when he was arrested, he had a vial of urine around his leg. Timothy Haslett did. And that implying that he was actually on his way. So it was suggested he was unemployed at the time, that he was on his way to a job interview. And so we know what that means, right? I mean, he realizes he's probably going to have to do a urine test for drugs, which then would mean he's using someone else's urine, which means he's likely on drugs, which is why he wants to use somebody else's urine. I don't think I'm reaching there with assuming that. So while we haven't necessarily heard of specific drugs or what was going on, I mean, there likely seems to be a drug issue. And it's ironic that he's blaming his wife, his ex-wife, for the drug issue when he's got urine, somebody else's urine around his leg when he's arrested. What's that about?
Well, he's blaming his ex-wife for everything. So, I mean, not atypical, but in with someone like this, that's not particularly healthy. But the letter doesn't even. So the letter's sort of a defense about why they should let him out, how he hasn't really committed any crimes, and it's all about custody issues. It has nothing to do with the reason he's sitting in jail. Right? Like there's almost something delusional about it, you know.
The letter's bizarre. The letter's
bizarre, right? There's something borderline. I don't, you know, it does seem that this is someone who may not have the best orientation to reality at times. So that, you know, we've heard that there was some paranoia, that he tended to be really disorganized in the last couple of years. So there clearly could be some issues around his thought processes and maybe some type of psychosis. I don't know. I don't know for sure, but he's not, unlike Rex Heuermann. I think Rex Heuermann probably has a much better grasp of reality. Rex Heuermann these are both frightening figures, but Rex Heuermann is someone I think who, when he decides to commit a crime, he's going to plan it down to the most minute details, and he's going to be completely oriented and aware and present when he's committing those crimes. Whereas Timothy Haslett, my guess is not going to do as much planning. It's probably going to be more impulsive, and he might be on drugs when he's doing it. He's going to be more disorganized, right? Which isn't to say one or the other. I mean, it's just different personalities, both frightening.
Yes. Thank you, CC. I did read the 8-page letter Tim wrote. You can find that again on our Timothy Haslett playlist. You know, the letter, John, we read it again today as we prepared for this live tonight. You're right. It's so separate from reality. Here he is with these horrendous charges, and he's just arguing and demanding that he should still get to be able to see his son, but not just get to see his son. He doesn't end there. I want to see my son. He's saying, I demand that she bring him a certain amount of times a month, that he has visitations with a relative on my side, that I'm going to need him to see him this many times on his summer vacation, and his aunt's going to need to see him this long on his summer vacation, and that I'm going to need to be able to report him on my taxes. I mean, it's not just, I want to see my son. It's like, this is what's going to happen, everyone, while I'm sitting here in Clay County Detention Center. Well,
he's also telling law enforcement what to do. I mean, it's completely divorced from reality in many ways, but I'm hesitant to use the term narcissistic because that's a term that's thrown around so often these days, but it's super self-absorbed. It's super self-centered at the very least, right? There's that his perception of the world is that that if he negotiates with law enforcement or with the DA or the prosecution over custody issues and child custody pay, or, payments for that, his ex-wife is paying for his child, right? So he's essentially trying to negotiate with law enforcement so that he can get released. Like, it's almost as if he's acting as if this crime never happened and the real issue is custody, which has nothing to do with the reason he's sitting in jail.
Right. People are mentioning delusional. I know you've mentioned that, and Lori Davis. I like her comment. She says control. They all have an issue with control.
Right. Control is a common theme with these types of characters because somebody like Timothy Haslett and Rex Heuermann, and take your pick of any serial killer, they don't like to feel weak, they don't like to feel vulnerable, they don't like to feel emotions in general. So obviously their preferred method of dealing with the world is to control it and to control people's reactions and to feel safe. That's how they feel safe, is that if they have control over people, then they don't have to be vulnerable, then they don't have to feel afraid, they don't, like, all the things that they're trying to avoid through their behaviors and their violence. Control is the mode that allows them to circumvent all of those feelings.
Yeah. Right, Psycho. Writing demanding letters while in jail is almost laughable, though.
Yeah, right. Right.
It is. Extreme control, extreme everything. There is a lot of extreme here. We still haven't shared some really fascinating insider information. Still, hold on. And if you are appreciating and valuing this video, please give it a like. And let me tell you why else actually this particular video is important to give a thumbs up to, despite the horrendous subject I know we're discussing, is because this case has not received the attention it deserves. You heard from Bishop Caldwell. Bishop Caldwell himself said they're going to forget about us tomorrow. And if you haven't heard about this case, and we've been following it since October, there's a reason. We need this case to get attention. So I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I'm always asking you to do that for us, but in this particular situation, with this particular case, please give us a thumbs up to allow Janie Crosdale and TJ and their friends and Bishop Caldwell to give them this attention while police and law enforcement continue to investigate. Thank you. Sorry. End of TED Talk. Finish my rant. We can continue. Thank you.
Yeah, let me just mention before I forget. Let me mention some other similarities and differences. I think this is an important one. That one thing about Timothy Haslett is that he could never keep a job, and he washed out of the Navy. I don't know why. We don't know why, but he was in the Navy a short period of time. He was discharged, didn't make it, washed out. He went from job to job for a long period of time. He did get a job with the railroad for almost 15 years, 14, 15 years. And then he was fired. And by the way, because that's a union job, it's very difficult to get fired from those types of bureaucracies, but he managed to do it. So from what we can tell from our sources, he was constantly in conflict at work. He was getting in fights with bosses, colleagues. He clearly had problems with authority. He may have been drinking at work. There was apparently a DUI involved in his dismissal. We don't know the exact details, but Tim Haslett was someone who couldn't stay in a relationship, couldn't keep a job, right? There were all these issues going on, whereas Heuermann would be an example of someone who not only did he keep a job, but he started his own architectural firm. He was the boss, and he was totally in control of it. So, right, a much higher level of functioning on the one hand. On the other hand, somebody like Heuermann recognizes probably that with his issues and pathology and his sort of being an outcast, that he would much prefer to be in charge. So he starts his own firm precisely because he doesn't want other people to tell him what to do. He wants to be the authority figure, whereas a guy like Tim Haslett, who doesn't have Heuermann's education, sort of goes from job to job, and he's not functional enough or he doesn't have enough mental health to succeed at work, and he keeps getting fired. And so he's got this, Timothy Haslett has this constant instability wherever he goes, whether it's work, relationships, right? He can't find any stability in his life. And perhaps some of that has to do with the fact that his mental health is deteriorating. maybe there are issues that look more like psychosis as time goes by. I don't know. I mean, how old was he? He was in his 30s, right?
Yeah, 30. I wanted to say 36 and I bit my tongue because I like to be factual
Yeah,
and
I
I
think
didn't know if that was exact age he was arrested. But that
so
was
there
what I
could be
have in my brain.
there could be some mental health issues with him that are accelerating and are becoming worse, and he knows that, and he's really having a hard time functioning or staying in a job or whatever. So it could have been a situation where all of the mental health issues eventually caught up with them.
Yes. Yes. Um, that one thing, I have a big question for you, John,
Okay.
but I don't know if I should. Do you still have some more information here? I didn't know if you were done yet, but I wanted to move on to just a bit of insider info that we have.
Okay.
that
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
I really want
absolutely.
to ask you about it. So we have one more clip to play from Bishop Caldwell,
Okay.
and then I want to talk about what we've discovered since then that you're only going to hear here on Hidden True Crime. And it's about Timothy Haslett. And I hope that we can discuss this here because it's all right. Let me make sure I might get the wrong clip. I have two clips here. So I think I'm going to pick the right one. Hold on.
There was clothes found, other women's clothes found on the premises. If you find a bunch of other women's clothes, where are the women that those belong to?
You're still muted.
I first want to agree with Bishop Caldwell. Point well taken. If there are women's clothes, where are the other women? How many women were there? I agree, but I'm going to take this women's clothing thing a little bit further. We have been talking to people and someone specifically who even saw some of the underwear that Timothy was wearing one day. And that it was female underwear. It was lacy. These were not this was not a pair of underwear bought at Costco. Let's say that. This was intimate underwear. It was even suggested that one day someone might have even seen him wearing a thong, but that it was lacy, it was red, it was colored, that he wore women's underwear. I don't even know where to start, and I guess I don't even have a question. The whole stating that blows my mind because that just throws things. I mean, Kai Ocean is saying one of my thoughts. This dude wore his trophy women's underwear.
Yeah. That was actually when Lauren brought that to my attention, that was actually the first question I asked her. Well, was he wearing the underwear after?
Yeah,
or right after he
it was after the room was built. So after the room was built. So he built the room in 2020. We don't know his crimes, but this was 22.
But I think there's a lot of there's a lot of potential issues there. I guess it could be, I agree with Kai, it could be very much like a trophy in the sense that it's a reminder to him of his power and his ability to murder people. And, so that's right. He's like, there's a sense in which if it is his victim's underwear, I think there's a sense in which this is about possession. He's trying to possess them in some way. And the way that Dahmer, I mean, this is a different pathology, obviously, but in the way that Dahmer consumes his victims, feeling like he wants them to be a part of him, would be like Tim Haslett's way of doing that. If it's the victims, If it's not the victim's underwear, if this is just underwear he's purchasing from Walmart, let's say, then it might be a little bit of a different presentation. So that in that case, it might be more of a fetish. We talked last time when we talked about Huerman, we talked about paraphilias. Paraphilias are deviant sexual behavior. So this could be a paraphilia. A lot of times there's an intersection between paraphilias, personality disorders, and sexual homicides. And so I think here you're seeing the possibility, like Huerman. So that was true of Huerman. I think you're seeing here the possibility that these elements are intersecting, that you're getting a paraphilia or some type of deviant sexual behavior or fantasies, let's say, and you're combining that with some type of mental health issues or maybe even a personality disorder. And that can be a really combustible combination. That can be, a dangerous combination. And so you've got the same elements are lining up that kind of lined up for Huerman, and setting up the potential for lust murder, depending on. I mean, my guess is that if that is a type of paraphilia here, my guess is that there's probably many more behind that. So you're probably just scratching the surface there.
You were recently reading something that explains that serial killers are very rare now. That there are not a lot of serial killers, and while we don't know what charges Timothy Haslett will ever face, I suspect he is one. I suspect that he is one or was trying to be one. How about that? I think you have to have killed at least 3 people. TJ escaped.
Right. I mean, with Timothy Haslett, right, she escaped, so she wasn't murdered. But I mean, certainly you'd have to say that the intent was to murder. I don't remember the charges now. I don't remember if they're trying to get him for attempted homicide.
No, just R and kidnapping for her.
Okay. So
we maybe someone that was on his way to being a serial killer, a potential serial killer.
Well, and so you have these barrels, you have multiple barrels. I'm sure he doesn't have those up for decoration purposes. I'm sure he's not, trying to augment his bachelor pad with these beautiful blue barrels, right? So
right.
The barrels have a purpose. They serve a function. And, whether, unfortunately, I think in the Haslett case, if there is acid involved, and if you took a page out of Breaking Bad, out of Walter White's playbook, then he may have destroyed a lot of evidence. And so it's possible he could be a serial killer and you never know it unless he confesses. He doesn't seem like the type of guy who's going to give you a confession.
Right. And why is it that serial killers, I mean, this is a good thing. Serial killers are rare, but you were almost telling me that they've become more so.
Well, so I read an article in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago that was really fascinating, that argued that the number of serial killers or serial killings is down dramatically because of the increases in technology. So with door cams and police cams and cameras everywhere, and the improved analysis of DNA, and with cell phone technology improved, like, it's so much harder to get away with crimes these days, especially. So if you're a serial killer, that means you have multiple victims over a period of time. So every time you commit a crime, you're leaving behind evidence. You're leaving behind clues, trace evidence. There's just no way you can commit a crime without impacting the crime scene to some degree. And so serial killers, the first time they kill, it might be hard to identify, obviously, but as they leave behind signatures and their MOs become more apparent, it becomes more likely they're going to be caught. And so, because more DNA is available, because there might be cameras. And so I think, and because you can make more mistakes. So I think serial killers, although they may want to engage in that behavior, apparently they're aware of the fact that forensics has improved dramatically, that the technology has improved, that there's more cameras out there watching. There's better ways to analyze DNA. Contact DNA is more prevalent, right? So, the number of serial killers has gone down dramatically. So I think this is an interesting case. Well, okay, let's leave it at that. We can't say he's a serial killer because, number one, he hasn't been charged with Janie yet. But number two, we don't know. There might be so many bodies that just disappeared or that will probably never be found. But I don't know. He certainly tends to fit the profile of someone who would commit multiple murders over time, and certainly based on what his first victim said, that she was lucky that she got away, that the other people didn't, implies that there's multiple people.
I want to quote her. As tight-lipped as law enforcement has been, we know that she stated, "My friends," just like Bishop Caldwell stated, "My friends did not make it." And it is my suspicion that we have found one of those friends. So where is the other one?
Right. So he certainly looks like someone who tends to fit that profile. Whether the evidence bears that out, I don't know.
And Excelsior Springs police chief agrees, where he stated, "I believe this man has done a lot more." I'll read it here again. He states, I just want to say the police chief himself said, where is it? That, well, I can't find it, but he stated that he believes it keeps him up at night, and he believes he's done a lot more than we know about. Here it is. This is one of those cases that keeps you up at night. Excelsior Springs Police Chief Gregory Dole told the Star during an interview, "My personal opinion from the Excelsior Springs Police Chief, Tim has done more than what he's already charged for," he said of Haslett. But being able to prove that is a totally different thing. So we are going with evidence. We are going with law enforcement have said. We're going with what the victim said. So it's fair that we're also speculating there.
Right, exactly. So, but again, he clearly tends to fit that profile. And if you presume that his goal was to kill the first victim, then you already have two victims there. I mean, he didn't, so you can't charge him with that. But you have to look at his intent.
Right.
And then to presume that since this room was built in 2020, that these were the only two women he targeted over a period of over 2 years seems hard to believe. So I don't know. I hope they dig a little deeper and try to connect him to some other missing women or victims as well, because
I hope so too.
He most definitely fits the profile of someone who would be very similar to, if not a serial killer.
I hope so too. And that's again why I do hope that people share this video. We gave an introduction to this crime, and like this video and subscribe, because and if you're a creator here, discuss this case. We are not podcasters that say we own a case. We want people to start digging into this case. Let's give it the attention it needs. Let's make people aware. Because there's a lot to uncover when it comes to Timothy Haslett, which brings me to one question. Does he eat pizza crusts? Do we know what kind of pizza? I don't think anyone has told us yet what kind of pizza he likes. Or, sorry, maybe bad joke.
Well, I don't know, but I saw a comment about someone's husband owns Blue Barrels for his business. So, but I guess my question there would be, well, okay, he's got Blue Barrels, but does he have the acid to go with the barrels? Right? That's
right.
That's what Timothy.
Does he have it? Does he have a seat? Did he build a secret room in his garage in a house he was renting?
Well, yeah, that too. Right.
While unemployed, just for the heck of it. Yeah.
And we could go on and on. Was he volatile? Did he have problems with authority? Did he threaten people? On and on. Did he point guns at people?
Was he openly racist and misogynistic on social media? On and on and on. Yeah.
Right.
Did a woman
Right.
escape his torture chamber and share the horrendous things that happened to her? And I think that's why John and I have been invested in this case and have remained invested. And despite not always hearing about what we're uncovering, we haven't forgotten TJ, and we certainly don't want to forget Janie Crosdale. And we hope that someone is charged in Janie Crosdale's death, whether that's Tim and or others. You know, is there anything else you want to talk about tonight, John?
I think, are we going to end here then pretty soon?
Unless you have something else you want to bring up.
Not really. There's just one of our sources gave us a quote that Timothy Haslett had said to her when he was kind of in a vulnerable place. And I think the quote really kind of says it all. So I just wanted to read that. This is a direct quote from Tim Haslett. And he told this person, he said, "Have you ever been somewhere when you knew you weren't wanted?" Right. And to me, that quote says so much about him in the sense that I think Timothy Haslett felt like there was never any place where he was wanted. You know, and a lot of what he's doing is precisely to try to repair or remedy that feeling of not being wanted. I think if there's a motif for Timothy Haslett, it's this feeling of not being wanted and this desire to be wanted. His mother didn't want him. He wasn't close to his father. His stepmother abused him as well. Like this is a guy who was constantly rejected. He was bullied. He felt like an outcast, a loner. He didn't feel wanted. He didn't feel loved. And that's always a prescription for problems later, especially if you combine it with the type of fear he apparently had, the hatred he has, the racism. When you combine all that, you know, watch out. Get out of the way.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. Thank you to those of you that may be watching that have helped us in this case. If anybody else has any information about this case and you want to come forward and privately, email us at hiddentruecrimeinfo@gmail.com. Please leave your questions about this case, as well as Lisk, Daybell, and the multiple other cases we cover in the comments of this video. People ask us questions in many ways, and we're learning that being able to go to our lives the next day or in the past few days to look at the videos before our next live, to look at the comments before our next live really helps us. So please leave your comments, your questions that you have for Dr. John in the comments of this video. And if you would like us to continue covering this and answering your questions, please let us know there. And again, with your questions. Thank you for liking this video. Thank you for sharing this video. Thank you for remembering Janie Crosdale. Thank you for remembering TJ, the victim in the probable cause. She rescued herself. I want to say that too. She rescued herself all on her own, without law enforcement, without podcasters, without people even knowing she was missing. She's an incredible woman. I'll see if I can find any information on her because many of you are asking how she is doing. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And until next weekend, we'll see you.
All right. Thanks, guys. Good night.
Good night.